It is day 3 of the 12 days of birth stories. I'm so excited. Today we have Chelsea, who's going to come and talk to us about her 4th baby and how she got stuck, but also her experience not really feeling supported in her birth with her care providers. So we're going to get in touch with her in a minute. I'm going to invite her in. I'm going to check in with you guys. How is the weather? How is the weather where you are? Because I have a literal sheet of ice on the window over here. So tell me if you guys also. Ring a ding a ding dong. Oh, there's her. Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, I don't know how to change this. I guess, oh, here we go.
Yeah,
Aha.
there we go.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Because I do have the fan on just to kind of
Yep.
make it.
Keep you warm. Okay. I see you. I hear you. Okay. I was just asking people what their weather's like.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sheets of ice in road beneath.
yeah, same
And
with you.
okay, I see it on your car. It's crazy. My friend just came home from the highway and she said it was the worst. She's lived in the Sioux and she's coming back to Peterborough and she has the worst drive she's ever had in her life.
Wow.
Scary. Yeah.
Terrible timing.
So I wanted to show you. So I kept your photography, your birth photography book that I made.
I have mine too.
This is not where's the black one? Oh, I have to go get it. It's probably in my bedroom. I'll go get it later. But I have two books that I kept from my photography life. This one is one of the first projects that I did with this kind of storytelling was a story about
Yeah.
feeding. And so I captured different mom stories of feeding their babies. And they actually have a little write up of their story. So this is a really special project. And then that's kind of one of is that the way that we met was through?
No.
I can't remember.
You were doing the project at your house and it was pregnancy and babies. So you had a picture of me pregnant with Avery.
Oh,
And
I don't even remember.
yeah, was it at your house? It had to have been. I'm pretty sure it was at your house.
Oh yeah,
There was a
yeah.
piano.
Okay, I do remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that was how we officially met. And then those bump to baby meetups.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, yeah, I'm trying to remember. And then, yeah, you were at Avery's birth. And then you did another series because there is another picture, a few pictures that I have of Avery nursing, but he was much older. I want to say it was in February or so.
So cool. It
Yeah,
all blurs together.
it really does. But it would be, since Avery is now 8, it would be 8 years that we've known each other.
So
Yeah.
today, yeah, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro as to the age gaps between your kids and the where you gave birth with each of them, and then we can kind of fast forward it to your latest birth.
Yes. Okay. So Carter is 13. So that's just crazy to think. Yeah, but 13 years ago, I gave birth. And his birth was just a typical hospital birth. There's nothing crazy to report. It went
Yeah.
as smoothly as it could go. I was 20, so I did not have any birth education. I didn't know anything. So I really looked to the OB as my,
Mm-hmm.
you tell me what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. And then of course, because when you have an OB, when you go into labor, typically your OB is not going to be the one to deliver because it's the on-call. And so my OB was on holidays that week, of course, which I actually did know because he had told me he was going on holidays, but I was 38 weeks pregnant, so we didn't really
You thought you had.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to kind of go along with the prodromal labor, I don't know if I'm saying it right.
I say prodromal, but
Okay.
tomato, tomato.
So so I had that with every single pregnancy, but
So like
with Carter,
the start and stop, the start and stop. Yeah.
So at 34 weeks, I was in the hospital thinking I was in labor, and they told me it was Braxton Hicks, but I was a centimeter dilated.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 36 weeks, I was 3 centimeters dilated because I was still having these contractions. And no one really told me, oh, you should be staying in bed and not doing anything to keep that baby in. Maybe because it was my first. And you know, you can walk around 3 centimeters dilated for weeks on end.
Yep.
So anyways, I didn't really think anything of it. I was doing everything. I stopped working, but other than that. And then, at 38 weeks, I was having crazy contractions, and I went to the hospital expecting them to say, oh, you'll have to go home. You know, it's just, it's the Braxton Hicks again. And then the doctor came in and checked me, and as he checked me, he said he was breaking my water. So I didn't have that consent to break my water, and I didn't know the possible consequences of breaking your water early. So I did luck out in that everything did go smoothly, and I didn't have to worry about anything because 6 hours after my water broke, he was born.
Wow.
So yeah, it was good in that sense. And then 4 years later, Gavin was born. And so because I had Carter early at 38 weeks, starting at 37 weeks with Gavin, I was having constant prodromal labor in the back. I was going for walks every single day. Those contractions were so strong, but then the moment I would go to bed, they'd go. They were gone. But I was timing them. I'd be timing them on the dot, you know, and they would be like 5 minutes apart. And it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we go to the hospital? Oh, and I should mention with Gavin, we had a midwife. So starting with Gavin, that was my first midwife experience. And I absolutely loved the care leading up to the birth. Everything was great. I loved my midwife team. And then there was a few moments, I think, and we lived 45 minutes away from the midwife office. So that was another aspect that I had to think about, you know, if this was true labor, I didn't want to be laboring in the car for 45 minutes getting to the hospital because we were choosing a hospital birth with Gavin. So, so there was 2 instances, I think, where we went to the hospital, and it was just, you know, Braxton Hicks, the prodromal labor that was, you know, not necessarily ruining my days, but it was taking hold of me every single day, wondering, is this birth? Is this going to lead to birth? Yeah. So anyways, on my due date, actually, my water broke at 1:30 in the morning with Gavin, and with his birth. So I called the midwife immediately to say my water broke, but I wasn't having contractions as soon as my water broke. So she said, okay, you've got lots of time to head to Peterborough, so just come when you can. And within 20 minutes, my contractions were 2 to 3 minutes apart. So I didn't even have a lead up because I had that lead up for 3 weeks, right? That early, my body getting ready. So as soon as my water broke, 20 minutes after, it was like full force. And we drove to Peterborough, and I will never forget that car ride because it was horrible. Having to sit up, having to sit upright while and I was having back labor because he was sunny side up, so I couldn't get comfortable. So anyways, then so that was at 1:30. We got to the hospital probably around 3, and Gavin was born at 6:25.
Wow.
So pretty quick with him, and his was pretty straightforward. However, as Becky was talking about with the cervical lip, I did have that with Gavin, and as he was sunny side up, they were starting to get concerned that he was stuck. So they were trying to swipe this lip away, and I will never forget that. It was like so much more intense than pushing out the baby, so much more intense than those contractions, because someone is manually trying to
manipulating your tissue.
Yeah. And I mean, at that point, I was screaming for the epidural because I'm like, I can't do this. Like, what are you doing to me? So anyway, he was a little bit stuck, so his heart rate was dipping, so they started to get concerned and asked for the on-call doctor to help assist with the idea of a vacuum. And I mean, it was not in my birth plan. I mean, obviously, my birth plan was open, but my birth plan was like not having any medical intervention, because with Carter, I had got the epidural. So I really did not want anything at all. I just wanted it to be, you know, the most hands-off experience, but then it ended up being very hands-on. And so the doctor that came in ended up being my OB that I was supposed to have with Carter. So he had, so it was, I was kind of glad, because I'm like, oh, at least I know you.
A relief, a little silver lining in that situation.
So I was like, oh, thank goodness. So he had come in, and actually, I'm not sure what he did, because, you know, he was in and out, but he turned Gavin's head with one of my contractions, and Gavin just came right out. So the vacuum not needed. Everything was fine. However, I did end up having a small hemorrhage. So instead of being a typical midwife birth at the hospital and being able to leave after 3 or 4 hours, I had to stay on oxytocin for 12 hours just to help get my body to start clotting properly. So that was the only downside in that, because I was like, oh, we get to leave. And then my midwife was like, I'm a little concerned, so I think you need to stay. That was fine. But so the difference between giving birth with Carter and the epidural, and then Gavin with no medical intervention needed, I felt like I was like on this high. Like, it was the most amazing feeling, because I didn't have that with Carter. You know, getting up and walking around and moving, it was hard after being with the epidural, and heavy, like I felt a lot of heaviness, and I was swollen. Like, I was very, very, very swollen after having Carter, but with Gavin, I wasn't. And I just felt so good, like my adrenaline. Like it was feeling, because like I, you know, obviously not knowing any different than Carter's birth, I was like, wow, this must be because I did this on my own. You know, like this was all me. So it felt very empowering. And then Gavin was born, and 3 months later, we ended up pregnant again with Avery. So to kind of talk about that aspect, I am a huge exclusive breastfeeding mom. Like I'm very informed in the breastfeeding community. I've taken a peer breastfeeding course with one of the lactation consultants in Peterborough. Like breastfeeding was my thing. And one of the things that the breastfeeding community talks about, especially Jack Newman, because I did attend one of his talks at Trent University, is that if you exclusively breastfeed, you will not get pregnant. Now, obviously, that was not like I wasn't relying on that or anything like that, but I have not had a period. So I didn't expect to get pregnant. That way. And I did have one period. And so then that was like, okay, now I need to track, right? Because that's what I had been doing, was tracking my cycle. And so anyway, was just faulty tracking that ended up leading to Avery's pregnancy. But everybody called me the anomaly at the time because everyone's like, what, you got pregnant while breastfeeding? And yes, I did.
Yeah,
Also,
I mean, let's pause there and talk about that for a little minute, because it's very good information for people that you could be cycling without a true like a true menstrual period happening post baby. And there is this idea that, yes, when we are breastfeeding, we have all of the hormones and all of the signs and signals for our body that we're still taking care of something. We're very much in need to provide life to this infant who uses us as the life source through the boobies with the milk. But I think it doesn't take into account like our modern day society. Again, we kind of talked about that last time too.
Yeah.
And story. Like, there's so many other things in our environment that influence our hormones. And that will impact how, even though we're breastfeeding, that we're absorbing things that shift that, as well as, like, you got your first period, you're maybe in the past, because Jack Newman's been around for a long time, you know, women had regular cycles. They were way more predictable. That's our medical model, right? 28 days, ovulation on day 14, bingo bango, that's it. But now women are all over the map with autoimmune conditions that impact their cycles, all kinds of womb health issues, not to mention now we have like vaccine shedding, which there's data coming out that supports that interruption of menstrual health and menstrual cycles for women. So yeah, we can't rely on on these natural things anymore as like an exclusive hardline, like, yep, you won't get pregnant if you breastfeed, so go to town, because it's not necessarily the case. And I'm sure there's many other women who've had like an oops baby happen that way.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of too, like, with that, because I did have my one cycle, but then the next cycle came. So I thought, because that's what it was. Yeah, I thought, no, like, there's no way I'm pregnant. I had taken like 10 tests, and it was all showing negative. So I thought, okay, it's just my cycle being wonky because I had my first period. You know, my hormones aren't back to normal. And then I ended up, I think it was after like 10 days, I was like, maybe I'll just do one more test just for that final confirmation. And that's when we saw the faint line. And then obviously I had this huge, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to navigate being pregnant? And I have this newborn baby. And
yes. Oh my goodness.
a lot of that part of my life is like a huge blur, because I was in like this survival mode, because it was hard, very, very hard. And so now obviously we have 2 boys, and now we're pregnant with a third, and we ended up finding out that it was another boy. So I was about to become a mom of 3 boys. And
too, you're still so young.
Yes, because I was 25 when I had Avery. And I also too wanted to kind of backtrack with Gavin. I was in university. So I was in university taking women's studies at Trent, and I didn't want to stop my studies. So I ended up double checking with professors and whatnot to see if I could attend university with this baby. I mean, I'm taking women's, so it's like, nobody should have a problem with this. And nobody did. And a lot of it too, I was able to do online. So I actually only had to attend one course in person. And Gavin was born September 4th, and my classes started like the 12th. So I had this huge, like, this brand new baby. Yes. And it was really good. And then there ended up being, at that time at Trent University, there was a huge breastfeeding initiative on campus going on. So I was able to take part in that and talk about my experiences and being able to breastfeed freely in the class. You know, nobody had any issues. And some of my classes had, you know, it was very gendered.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like it was females only. And, you know, there were males in the class. So, you know, and plus sometimes I'd be out in the hallway with people
Yeah,
walking.
of course.
Yeah.
You need to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Weren't you like a literal poster of you breastfeeding with me?
Yeah. I still have it actually. I have it in my closet.
Oh, that's funny. Chelsea was a life-sized poster of breastfeeding mom.
No, that wasn't me. That was somebody else, but it looked like me. Yes, because I had so many people say, like, I just saw the life size of you, and I'm like, it's not me, it's somebody else.
That's hilarious.
That was
you were there in spirit.
Yeah, that was for another campaign.
Okay.
So yeah. There was like two going on at the exact same time. One was through, I believe, the La Lachey League or the International.
The IBLC.
Yeah, it was something along those lines. It wasn't the same as the Breastfeeding Coalition with the campus initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Regardless, so you started off your very first experience, super young mom, 20, continuing to go to school, pregnant, and then with a baby.
Yeah.
And then 4 years later, you said you had your next baby, but then 3 months after you had him, you got pregnant again. So did you go back to the same midwives?
I did, but it was a different team. And we were actually in the process of buying our house. So we were moving from the Bowmanville area because we're both from Peterborough, and we had moved out to Bowmanville to help my husband's accommodation to and from work because he can do a lot of traveling. So it was easier to be close to the 401. And so anyways, while we're pregnant with Avery, we buy our house. And so we are now moving to Northumberland County and like the far side of Northumberland County near Colborne. So I'm now further from Peterborough than I was in Bowmanville. And the midwives were still willing to take me on, which was nice because I really didn't want to change from the midwives, the clinic that I knew, and then coming out to this new area. Because, I mean, this area of Northumberland, I had never been in. I didn't know the hospitals. I didn't know anything. So I was like, I just need that like familiarity of being in Peterborough and the same midwife clinic. And I knew that my option with the midwives in Peterborough was their midwife clinic. I could give birth there since I couldn't have a home birth here because I was out of the catchment area because Peterborough midwives no longer have rights at Coburg Hospital. So I had to make that decision and be like, nope, we're just going to go to Peterborough. And so, yeah, with Avery's birth at 37 weeks. So actually, I'll kind of describe my midwife team because I do feel like this was a huge thing. So my midwife team, I had a student midwife and I saw her the most, and she was the most amazing person that I could have ever had on my midwife team. I don't know if she's watching. I loved her. I just can't even, I don't even have enough words to describe the amount of support she had given me in all of it. So at 37 weeks, she ended up telling me that like the main midwife of this team told me that they would not be doing home checkups on me and that I would have to stay in a hotel in Peterborough after giving birth. And so one of those things, like, I'm thinking, why are you just this now? Like, I have, 3 or 4 weeks to figure out what to do, and I have 2 other kids. Like, what the heck? If I had have known that from the get-go, then maybe I might have changed my mind and found a different midwife, came in my area.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things, like, going into his birth that, like, was kind of bugging me. But anyway, we made it work, and my parents lived 20 minutes from the hospital outside of town, so I was like, I'll just be there the week that I'm due, because I had that, I'd have my appointment, so we'd stay there. And my husband was on nights at the time, and our car broke down. So I had one vehicle, so it was like, okay, well, I'm staying in Peterborough, and then he'll just come when he can, basically. So it was kind of stressful navigating that, but anyway, it did work out in the end. And then obviously we had you be our birth photographer. So when Avery's birth started, I had it in my brain that because Carter's birth was 6 hours, Gavin's birth was 5 hours, I'm thinking Avery's is going to be like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
So when everything started, like, it had started and come on strong. And so, you know, we called everybody. We called you. We dropped the other 2 kids off at my sister-in-law's so my mom could attend the birth, you know, at the midwife clinic, and all of these things to, you know, get in order before I give birth to this baby. And I think it was 8 a.m. The midwives, like, everything was tapering off. Like, I was losing those contractions, and they were just not strong. They were going from being 5 minutes apart to 8 minutes apart, and then 10 minutes apart, because they had said, go for breakfast, have a change of scenery. So we did. Yeah. So we did. We left, went for breakfast, came back. They checked me, and there was no change. So go home, rest, you know, and we'll go from there. And in those moments, like, it was so hard for me because I couldn't rest. Like, my brain was, like, on high alert. And when I was having those contractions at the 10-minute mark on the dot, they were strong. Like, they weren't contractions that I could just sleep through. Like, they were very, very strong. So while everyone else was resting, I'm awake trying to figure out how I'm supposed to rest my body. So I ended up putting on a meditation that ended up letting me sleep during those 10 minutes. So I would sleep for 10 minutes, I'd be woke up, and then I'd go back into this sleep. So I really did get some rest to prepare for what was yet to come. And so then it was just after dinner, I started to have those contractions really pick up again. And so we went for a walk and made sure that they were still coming. And I remember grasping, my parents have these pillars in their kitchen, and I can just remember, like, putting my arms around and just moaning that low moan, and my dad being like, you need to go. You need to go to the hospital. And then that was when I was like, okay, I think maybe we should probably head back. But
sounds are a good indicator. Yes.
Yes. Well, yeah. Kind of a funny story. When I gave birth to Gavin, because that was my husband Logan's first experience with birth, the sounds that I was making, and I am very loud. I am not quiet. So, like, I really get those moans out. He said that I had sounded like a possessed cow that was dying.
Wow, okay.
And another funny story with that was my sisters were at the hospital waiting for me to give birth, and they weren't in the right waiting room. They were actually, like, right in the labor and delivery room where there was just a few chairs.
Yeah, and they could hear you.
Heard everything. Like, funny to laugh back now, but at the time they were, like, petrified of what sounds I was making.
Yeah,
but
it's not normal for people, but it's the most normal thing to do at the same time.
And it is, right? Like, it is. And as soon as the midwives coach you and say, not those moans, these moans, you're like, okay, Like, I know what I'm doing now.
Yeah, you
But
can channel
back,
the energy.
yeah. So then back to Avery's birth. One of the things with his, I didn't want them to break my water. So because we were at the birth clinic, I was worried if my water was broken prematurely, we'd have to move to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
really worried about things like that because I just didn't want that happening. So I ended up finally allowing them to break my water when they said, I think he was around 7 to 8 centimeters, and they said that's really going to start picking things up as soon as we break that water. Like, you're at a good stage.
Yes.
If we do, chances are we won't have to go anywhere. So I did let them break my water, and then yes, as soon as my water was broke, my body, it's like those instant hard contractions, 2 to 3 minutes apart. And then he ended up being born. And I believe, you'll probably know better than me, he was born with his cord around his neck and his body. So I can't remember exactly, but the midwives had said something like he was trying to maneuver down through the cord. And that's probably what took a long time for him to get to A to B to where he needed to be. Yes.
I don't quite remember. I should go look at the pictures because I feel like there's the pictures of, I won't show them on here, but there's the pictures of him emerging.
Yes, I do. We look at that book every so often, and yeah, one of them, I think I do remember seeing the cord around his neck. But also, I'm pretty sure Gavin also had the cord around his neck, so that was a normal thing.
Yeah.
And so then one thing I'll talk about quickly with Avery before I go to Emmeline is at 3 days, Avery had a fever. So our birth went smoothly, everything was fine. We finally got home because we had to stay at my parents' house for the 2 days so they could come at 24 hours and then on the second day to see him. So then we got home and we were out van shopping because I had said we only had one car. So we were van shopping and Avery had a fever. So we had to go back to Peterborough, got to the midwife clinic so the midwives could check him out, and immediately they sent us to the hospital. So I went from having this, hands-off birth in a clinic to having to go to the hospital thinking something is wrong. And one of the things that kept coming up my entire stay, we were there for 5 days, was, were you group strep B positive? Every single person kept asking me that because Avery had this fever, and I was like, well, no, I was negative. And like, because of this fever, they had to do all of this invasive testing. They had to do a lumbar puncture to make sure he wasn't going septic. It was
so scary.
So traumatic. Yes, so traumatic. And they ended up saying, one of the doctors said that it was just a fluke fever because everything came back fine, and that some babies just have a reaction after they're born. And that's what the reaction can sometimes present as, is just this fever to like the shock of being born.
It's so frustrating because I remember texting with you and you were like, I don't know, they're saying he might go septic. Like, is my kid gonna die? Like, you really were scared that your baby was in serious distress. Like, it was presented to you as something that was so incredibly serious, which again, if it was, glad that they took those steps, but nobody talked about this being, a potentially normal thing that happens for babies who are just trying to kind of catch up and like regulate basically. And so they're, they get a little warm because their body's like, oh, the outside world, let me just, sort some stuff out here.
Yes.
And then I'll be fine.
Yeah. And another thing too with that, I just gave birth to this baby 3 days prior, and nobody is checking up on me. I'm not being fed because he's the patient. So I am there, obviously, all day, every day. I was not leaving my baby's side because I'm wanting to breastfeed and make sure my milk is going to come down and support his needs. So I ended up creating a monster of a breast milk supply because I was pumping. And he had IV, so he was not wanting to nurse as much. So
Yeah.
it was a whole other thing. I remember crying to the lactation consultant on the phone about this because I was just, what am I supposed to do? Like, my baby's not nursing, and just pump as much as you can. And I did, and the nurses, like, I had so much of a stash. I still have the stash in my freezer because I can't throw it out.
Oh, that's funny.
I know, but the nurses are like, we hardly have any room in the fridge left. You have so much milk.
They're like, start passing it out because the milk is full.
I really should have, like, thinking back, because it's like I didn't need it. But
we've got a couple comments here from people. Cheyenne said that you're a warrior, and Rosie says you're remarkable. Nicole remembers that time with Avery. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Pumping is so challenging in general, and like, fortunately this was your third baby, so you had some experience under your belt. Like, I can't imagine if it was your first.
Oh my God.
How would that impact your breastfeeding journey moving forward? You probably would have been on formula, the way that works.
With that too, there was conflicting information between the lactation consultant at the hospital and the lactation consultant that I knew. And so when the lactation consultant at the hospital said to me, "Oh, you can do this," I knew, no, I'm not doing that. Like, that's going to affect my supply, or that's going to affect nipple confusion, or, whatever the case was. So I was just really thankful at the time to have the support of the lactation consultant I knew, to really help me navigate that. But yeah, anyway, after 5 days, we were released and everything was fine. And then we could go back to being our now family of 5. And everything was fine from there on. And then, I'm this mom of boys for 3.5 years. And we weren't really planning on another child. We had been talking about my husband getting a vasectomy. And I was doing the tracking method because I am very in tune with my body, and I know when I'm ovulating because I'm one of those people who get the wonderful ovulation pain.
Yeah. No mistaking.
Yeah.
That part of the process.
So I, was able to avoid anything during those times. And this particular time, it was a normal month, a normal cycle, because my cycle is very normal for the most part. And I had my ovulation week. I track it on my calendar. And then a week and a half later, I thought to myself, geez, I almost feel like I'm ovulating again. But I didn't think anything of it. And then lo and behold, I don't get my period. And we find out we are pregnant the week in March where the world shuts down.
What timing?
So it was like a huge range of emotions, like, what is going on? And I actually, after doing a lot of research, and to kind of fast forward a bit, I've been doing a lot of genealogy and learning about my dad's side of the family. I didn't know a lot of information on that side. And particularly my great-grandmother was a twin. And I'm starting to realize that there's a history of what seems to be hyperovulation. And so what I believe...
Okay. Was the twin. Got it.
Yes. So looking back at other information within her family, all kinds of things, I'm like, okay, we're not twins. So I do believe that I had a double ovulation.
Yeah,
and
I think that's one thing.
That's how I got pregnant with Emmeline. So obviously navigating the pandemic, what is going on, with X, Y, and Z, and also knowing that I really, really, really wanted a home birth. So it wasn't the pandemic driving the home birth. I would have wanted that regardless.
Yes.
So because of that, I decided, well, let's go with the midwives that are in this catchment area. And there's actually two teams. There's the Belleville midwives, then there's the Bowmanville midwives. So I got my name on both, and Bowmanville responded first. And I ended up going with them only because their office is in Port Hope. So I thought, okay, Logan works in Bowmanville. So if he had to meet me for anything, Port Hope was a great meeting point. You know, if he had to stay with the kids in the car or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I thought
it's easy, accessible. There's things to do. Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons why I went with them. But again, so this, you know, we've only been out here 8 years. So, and that would have been 4 years that we had been here, or 3.5, I guess. We still didn't know that many people. I didn't really have anybody I could say, hey, do you know this midwife team? Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
could you let me know how they are? So it was like brand new to me. And like I said, I am like a creature of habit, and I love familiarity. So it was like, I'm navigating the pandemic. I'm pregnant with my 4th baby. And now I have this brand new midwife team that I don't know anything about. And because of the pandemic, and because it was my 4th, I ended up like entering into this state of like almost feeling forgotten.
Okay.
So they didn't have a base rate for my blood pressure or anything until like 23 weeks. Up until that point, it was only phone calls that I was having. And I finally said something, and I said, should you guys not maybe get like a base rate of my blood pressure, you know, just to have in case, you know, it spikes or something.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, you haven't been in yet to meet any of us? No, I haven't. So
right. So it was like, because you had 3 other babies, they kind of put you maybe mentally into a category of like, she's good, she'll come in, we'll see her more frequently near the end, while also navigating, you know, how they were moving through the pandemic as a clinic and midwife. They probably just assumed you had been a previous client of theirs as well, because they had, you know, I don't know, I'm making stuff up for them, but I'm just thinking like that might have been something that was going on in their head as they were trying to navigate this. And yeah, how could they not have those things? I guess I'm trying to like problem solve.
Yeah, it was just interesting. And two, going into my 4th pregnancy, I do think the heightened anxiety of the pandemic really played into my anxiety. So I felt like if I had a little more support, I probably wouldn't have been as anxious. Also, I was feeling like so many more symptoms with this pregnancy than the boys. So I was like, what is this sensation? Like, what is happening? Like, I kept having this constant sensation of like the inside of my cervix from the womb side being literally grabbed. Yeah.
Scratched. Yeah. That happened.
Yes.
My 3rd as well. I mean, this is your 4th, but I had never experienced that sensation before until later on.
And it was like, oh my gosh, like, is my water about to break? Like, you know, it was like, what is this
baby?
Yeah, literally, they're like, the baby's hand's probably up there. And I'm like, every day it feels like the baby's going to fall right out from that sensation.
Yeah, like, can you get out of my cervix, you little weirdo? Like, leave me alone.
Yeah. So going into our anatomy scan, I wanted to find out the gender, obviously, mainly because I had all this boy stuff. So if we were having a girl, I wanted to get more girl stuff. But there was not even a part of me that thought she was a girl. So
right, when you're destined to be a boy mom.
Yeah. So when the doctor said, like, oh, there's the labia, I literally was like, what? Because what he was showing on the screen looked like like a
Penis.
like what I had seen in the other ultrasound. So I was like, no, that's not a labia. And then he ended up like, I don't even remember what he said for the rest of the scan because he came out and said it right away, and I was expecting that to be at the end. And he's like, "Oh, there's a labia," and I was like, "What? What did he just say?" And so then near the end of the scan, he's like, "There's a labia again. She's still a girl." But I thought for sure, like, playing a joke on me. Like, I still didn't believe him, and I didn't believe until she was born, and I actually saw. Because I was just like, no, like I'm not destined to have a girl. It's going to be a boy. So yeah, leading up to the pregnancy, it was still like, it was all relatively normal. Like I said, there was a few weird things that had happened that I'd never had happen to the other ones. And so when we started talking about my home birth plan with the midwives, we didn't actually talk about it at all until I think like 38 weeks.
Oh,
so
wow.
leading up to that, I didn't feel very confident going into it before having that conversation. Because like we just, you know, they never really discussed it with me, and I didn't know what to expect other than I figured it'd be pretty similar to Avery's birth at the midwife clinic. However, there was this added aspect because she was actually due in the end of November. The added aspect of
what month are we in?
Yes.
So the world shut down. We were definitely in lockdowns, and now we're in November.
And yeah, I'm just like not sure what the heck to think. Like, how is it gonna play out? And one of my envisions that I always wanted was to have my kids present at the birth if they wanted to be. And the midwives shut that down and said, because of the pandemic, like anybody else in the home other than you and your husband can be in the room. And if there's 2 floors, so then to have the kids separate on another floor. So I had to kind of like mourn this idea that like my kids wouldn't get to be present, and I was feeling really frustrated because I had always had my mom at every single one of my births. Like she's always been a very good help in supporting and being there. So I was now left with this, well, now my mom can't even be at my birth, and kind of like feeling sad for her and feeling sad for me. But then also too, because of, you know, the situation and where we live, I also needed somebody to care for the kids. So the only person that could really do that would be my mom. So it was like, okay, you know, my mom's going to be the one to watch the kids. So when we came up with that plan, I felt a little better. And then, yeah, so yeah, I just didn't know what the home birth was going to look like. And I mean, I had been watching videos. I still watch tons and tons of birth videos all the time. Like that's what my Instagram is just birth. So I had been watching a ton, and one of the things that I kept seeing was that ejection reflex. So
the fetal ejection reflex.
Yeah, that's going to happen to me. I kept thinking that's going to happen to me. Because I'm at home and I'm in this relaxed environment. And so I'm just saying this now because this does come up later on. So, yeah. So anyways, so the midwife, they came, they did their home visit. She did her home visit. So she's kind of telling me, okay, because you want to give birth up on the top floor, just in case we need you to have a second space available, in case we have to move you down to the down to the main floor in case there could be the idea that we have to transfer to the hospital. And again, because it was winter, if the weather is bad, you have to come to the hospital. So I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to the hospital. So another thing too was if the kids are sick, you know, that we should be going to the hospital if the kids are sick. So I had actually had my oldest do the virtual school that year, and I was homeschooling the other two because they were going to be in JK and SK. Because I refused.
Let's just assess what Chelsea has on her plate. Because Chelsea's also a lovely little homesteader.
Yes. Yeah,
So, COVID, lockdown, school, homesteading, husband, house, rural area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you had to do as a mom, and a lot of things that you were up against, and like that would have definitely given me a lot of anxiety and stress around like what day is it going to happen, what is the weather going to be like, I hope the kids are well, and like
Yep.
the plan of the childcare would have driven me crazy.
Yeah, it was a lot. Yes, I should backtrack. We live on an acre. We have a small hobby farm. We've got chickens. We also do meat chickens, and we have rabbits. So yeah, it was a lot. Actually, at that time, we had pigs too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was,
yeah.
there was a lot happening. Yeah, so I'm homeschooling those two. Got Carter, the oldest, is doing the virtual school just to make sure that we get this home birth that I want. Because I had this fear that if they're sick, I'm not going to get the home birth that I want. And to go back with what we were talking about with Becky, at that time, we were seeing mom and baby separated if mom showed any sign of being sick. So I just had this terrible fear that they were going to withhold her from me or something in these hospital-like settings, and that the safest place is to be in our house. To avoid all of that. Because that was like my biggest like alarm bell fear was, what if they take her from me because I have the sniffles? And then what if I can't breastfeed her and get that colostrum in her so she has all of those antibodies that she needs and all of these things. So another thing that I thought was really interesting, and maybe this could be, I don't know if all midwives do this, but I thought it was a really good idea. So they asked us to change the light bulb on our front porch to a specific color.
Okay.
And that way, if they do need to call an ambulance, they can say it's the porch with the blue light or the porch with the red light, just to make it a little easier in these rural areas sometimes especially in our area. There's a lot of roads that change halfway or, things that can just be complicated. So another aspect to it was we were like 4 minutes from the ambulance bay. So I really wasn't worried at all. Like I really had no fears in that sense. It was just more me feeling supported by my midwife team because I really didn't know them all that well because a lot of it was all phone call. And coming from knowing the other midwives with the other two so well, it was kind of like, oh gosh, I hardly know these people. Yeah. And like the third midwife of the team, I met at like 36 weeks for the first time. So, it was like, oh my God.
That's a thing to talk about. It's like in person feels really different than virtual, which is something I'm navigating in my business right now with moms and babies. But then we have these, extenuating, extraordinary circumstances we're trying to navigate. But what kind of support? So obviously you wanted to feel supported in your preparations for home birth and feeling like your pregnancy was healthy. But I know you wanted to talk more about this. Like, what other ways did you feel unsupported?
It was just mainly not knowing them and nobody really talking to me about home birth and like what it would look like. All that was said to me was, this is what needs to be done for an emergency. So your blue porch light and the floor bed in the living room in case we have to transfer you down there. And that was kind of it. I was like, oh, okay. Like, maybe, I mean, maybe it is, maybe, I don't know if yeah, I guess I don't really know if that is like a common practice to talk more about the home birth, or is it just, okay, these are the emergency routes and that's all we need to really talk about? Like, I don't really know what I was looking for. I just remember feeling like, I don't really know what I'm getting myself into, like, in
Right.
terms.
Okay. So you wanted kind of like a beautiful like crash course on, okay, let's do this. Having a home birth. This is what you're gonna do. But and I would say like people can chime in if their experience was different, but I would say most midwives go into these sessions with that emergency chat in mind. Like they've prepared that conversation for the appointment
Yeah.
rather than the empowering, like, this is the fun part of home birth, unless you have done your homework and you found a different class to teach you about birth and you've prepared yourself. Maybe also, I'm wondering if they just kind of assumed you did it before because
They
it's your
knew I
fourth baby.
Yeah, they knew I had the clinic birth, so maybe that was why. But like with the clinic, like I had used the gas, so I had
Yeah.
used the laughing gas to help with the contractions. So despite the clinic birth being similar to a home birth, there were still clinical hospital-like aspects, whereas in the
Yeah.
home, like not at all. So yeah,
Even
and I mean,
something simple like set up your space, like just wherever you decide, upstairs, and obviously for you it was upstairs and downstairs. Make sure you've got your towels and make sure you have this and like both, like to me I would say like make sure you have it in both spaces. Separate, half and half, and then if you need to, your partner can run up and down the stairs and grab extra supplies if needed. Kind of like that stuff. Like what do you really need in the home to prepare? And then the differences of when to call, because it's very different if you're going to a hospital or to the clinic, because here where you used to live and where I still live, there's one spot. So if somebody's in the clinic, you can't go and have a clinic birth. Your whole plan changes.
yeah,
So you would want to call ahead of time to plan for that. So yeah, there's all these like nuances that would be supportive for you, even though it's your fourth baby. You're having a completely different birthing experience and you're under all this stress, enormous global stress, unlike anything we've ever experienced before, trying to pull this together in like a really peaceful, beautiful,
yeah,
intervention free, especially way. So yeah, that's a lot. A lot. They left a gap of care, I would say, for you.
yeah. And I think too, I just needed to hear from them, like, don't worry, you got this.
Yeah,
Like
a
you
little
got
bit of
this. It'll be great.
validation.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what I needed was just, yeah, that like an actual like pep talk of, don't worry, this will be great. You got it. No problems,
Yeah.
right?
And I think
Um,
instead they were really preparing you that you weren't going to be there.
yes, I did. I really did get that idea. And I do think it was because of COVID,
Mhm.
um, that they weren't sure how to navigate being in somebody's home. And I just think because there was a lot of rules being thrown out to the midwives on what to do and whatnot. So I think a lot of it was like being afraid themselves. What if they got us sick? What if we got them sick and they spread it to other babies and those
Yeah, such
types of things?
a complicated thought process that we were all undergoing at that
Yeah.
time, for sure.
And then the actual birth in the midwife's care, it was like night and day compared to, feeling the lack of support. And then the actual birth, it was like my first midwife, like her mindset, like she was like in the zone.
Oh, I
And
love
I was
that.
like, oh, that's okay. Like, this is wonderful. But yeah, so I'll talk about the birth now.
Yeah.
So, um, again, I had the prodromal labor starting at 37 weeks. And because I live an hour and 20 minutes away from my mom, who is going to be the person coming to be with my kids, it was like I needed to let her know so she could be here in time. And so it was torture
Mm-hmm.
because every day was like, okay, it's picking up. Maybe you should come. My mom came and stayed for a whole week from the time I was 39. She stayed for, almost a week from, I think, 38 and a half weeks until like 39 and a half weeks or so. And I mean, I was having all of the signs of labor. I was losing my mucus plug. I was everything. Like everything was there. The intense pressure. And then it would stop and go away. I'd wake up pregnant the next day and start it all over again. And my mom ended up going home and bringing the kids with her. So then she was like, maybe if the kids aren't there and you don't have to worry about them, the baby will come.
Yeah, that's I believe in that.
Yeah. No, because we got to 40 weeks and because so Gavin and Avery were both born on their due dates. And Carter was born 2 weeks early. So I got to 40 weeks and thought, okay, she's coming. She's coming on my due date, just like the boys did. And then we're getting to 40 weeks, but then we're at the next day. So 40 plus 1. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why is this baby not coming? So I started to really experience what the other women have experienced when you have a baby go past your due date. And because of my past experiences and not going past that date, I was just starting to really feel that stress. And then we got to, actually at my 40-week appointment, they booked me for an induction. And I was just flabbergasted because I'm like, I have never had to have any intervention in that way. Like, I am not having this baby by induction because I knew that my body could do this. So I'm like, no. And so I started to like think about, her, because I had talked about how I had the hyperovulation. So my due date with her
was probably mixed up.
Was huge. So I started to think, well, maybe, if she's coming at the same timeline that Gavin and Avery came, maybe she's just waiting until that day if it's, the exact 40-week type thing. I know it's
yeah. Can you turn your video off and on? Just because on my end you're pixelated, and I wonder if it'll just like reset you. We can hear you perfectly. I can hear you perfectly.
Let me know if
it's clearing up a little bit. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like, it's okay. I can hear you really well. That due date piece, again, we had talked about it in some previous stories as well. Like, you lay everything on the line for this due date, and you get other people on it too. Like, your mom came, and that's a lot of support that she offered you, and so beautiful, and so like what an amazing thing to have in your life. But maybe at the wrong time, because we're so fixated on this date and like what it would mean based on your previous experience as well, which again, another myth that just as you continue to be pregnant and have babies, it doesn't mean it gets faster and shorter. That has nothing to do with it. Maybe in the past we did see these patterns with the majority of women, but life is different and we're not really seeing those patterns play out the same way anymore. So we can't make informed decisions for ourselves and for our babies based on these outdated models of healthcare. And then you end up in this situation where, you're getting already exasperated and exhausted because you've had this on and off labor. You've had your mom come, you've got all that family pressure, you've 3 children already, plus all the circus of the homestead, plus lockdown and COVID, and now you're being threatened with like an intervention.
Yes. Yeah, so I ended up going into this mode of like, I think so my induction date was December 10th. So my due date was the 30th. So on the 5th, on December 5th, I went into this mode of like, I am getting this baby out. I am not, like, she's not being induced. So I ended up that day, think I remember going to Walmart, and then I remember going to the Coburg Market and walking around, and I remember being in Walmart and having those same contractions and whatnot. And I got home and I was like dancing in my kitchen like crazy, like putting the music on, blasting, dancing around. I was like doing the stair step thing. I was doing, I think I remember talking to you actually, and I was doing you were telling me to do the cat cow.
Yeah.
I was doing the cat cow, and I was doing these like really deep squats, because you also told me to do this, and envision the baby coming down. So I was like, and I did like 40 of them. I would like grasp the top of our counter and then just go down, and I wasn't pushing, but I was like envisioning her coming down.
I love it.
And so we ended up that night going to bed, and I was having contractions. So my husband went to bed. I was having contractions, but it was what it was every single night before bed. Right. And I was watching a Christmas movie on the TV and bouncing on my ball. And I thought, well, I'll go to bed now, and see what happens. And at 12:30, I woke up to a contraction, and that had never been before because the contractions always stopped at night. And it had woken me up, but I don't remember the contraction. I just remember waking up being like, oh, that was just a contraction. So then I got up and waited for the next one, and they were about 8 minutes apart. So, I was like, okay, well, maybe this might go somewhere. So I thought, well, I'll get up and go on the birth ball some more. And I did some more of those squats again. And I was just kind of hanging out in the kitchen awake. Everyone's asleep. And at 1:30, so an hour after, the contractions went from 8 minutes to 4 minutes apart. But they were still the same strength as the 8-minute one. So it wasn't like they were getting stronger. Like I could talk through them. Not that I was talking to anybody, but I felt like I was fine. And so I just, was timing them and just kind of playing away on my phone, bouncing on the birth ball, seeing, where it was going to go. And at around 2:10, I thought, okay, since they're consistently 4 minutes apart, I better call my mom, because at this point she was back home in Edinburgh. So I called her and woke her up and I said, I am having contractions. They've been pretty consistent since 12:30, going from 8 minutes to 4 minutes. Like, I do think you have a lot of time because they're not painful yet.
Right.
So I think you have enough time that if you start getting ready to come and leave now, don't rush. Everything's fine. And I got off the phone with her, came into my kitchen, and my water broke. And I'm like, oh no. So I called her back because I knew as soon as my water broke, like, it's going to be 2 to 3 minute apart contractions. I won't have time to think. So I called my mom back and said, my water just broke. Or I think I texted. Like, my water broke. You need to come. Then I paged the midwives and they called me. Because I was able to talk at that point, she's like, well, you sound pretty fine. Because she's trying to gauge how much time she has to get to me and let the backup midwife know how much time she has to get to me. So I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're not painful right now, but I feel like I have a 20-minute lull before they're about to be. So, so anyway, she was like, yeah, I'm on my way. So that was at 2:30, give or take. So then I immediately, you know, start going up the stairs, more water is coming out, and I'm like, oh my God. So I go up, you know, wake up my husband, and I'm like, hey, you have to get the bed ready, you know, with all of this stuff on it.
Yeah.
So he starts doing that, and the contractions start picking up, and I'm like, holy moly, like, here we go. The kids are all sleeping, so at that point, like, I wasn't really worried about them. I knew my mom was on her way, and the midwife got there, I think around like 3:15 or 3 maybe. My mom got there at almost 4. The midwife didn't end up checking me until closer to 4, and I was 7 to 8 centimeters.
Mm-hmm.
So that had been my only check until pushing. But yeah, she checked me then, and I was 7 to 8 centimeters. And like I feel like I was doing so good. Like I was in that zone with her, being in my own house.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Much easier.
It was so much easier, yeah, to be in that zone and then have my husband. One of the things that he does for me when I'm in labor is like the squeezing of my hips and the counter pressure on my back. So, you know, he was doing those to help me. And then I remember just, you know, hanging on to him and like swaying, right? And doing all the things to help. And yeah, like the midwives, like they stay out of your way. They do their own thing. I was going back between my shower and in my bedroom, you know, and just like I couldn't believe like how less bothered I was by them being there. Like I didn't even know that they were there half the time because I could just be me. You know, nobody is watching me. You know, and it's like I could be in the shower, and like they weren't in there until they needed to do the heartbeat check. Yeah. But other than that, like I was doing my own thing, and they said, okay, just like let us know when you need to push. So eventually we got to that point, and because I had been watching so many birth videos at that time, I wanted to give birth squatting. I had envisioned it. I wanted that squatting birth, and I wanted that fetal ejection to happen. So when it came time to needing to push, now part of this now I've realized could have been because of the lip on my because I did have a lip on my cervix with Emmeline as well. It wasn't as bad as that though. But I would try squatting, and I like just kept thinking, well, the fetal ejection will kick in and that will help me to get her out. And it wasn't. You know, like I would do these little pushes, and I knew that they weren't strong enough. And I ended up kind of getting into this mental block in my head where I'm like, no, like she'll just come out on her own. And the midwife like didn't really know what was happening. And later on, she asked me like, what happened there? Because like I did notice, like, you know, what's going on. And I also had this crazy fear that she was going to be like a 10 or 11 pound baby. Because Avery was teetering when he was born at 40 weeks. He was teetering between 8 pounds, 15 ounces and 9. So I thought, well, if this baby is 6 days late and Avery was almost a whole pound heavier than Gavin, then I'm going to have this 11-pound baby. I won't be able to do it. Like, I was really, like, worried. So anyway, I ended up stopping with this squatting idea, realizing it was not working, and got into the old position that seems to work for me. Because it's similar to Avery's birth, right? I was trying to have that water birth with Avery in the tub, and it wasn't working. Like Avery's birth, I can remember feeling him come down and go back up when I was in the water.
Turtling, like all that.
So I remember that, and I thought, no, this isn't happening again. So I got on the bed, and that was when they did feel the lip. So she's like, you know what, there's a lip, so I do need to swipe it away. And I was like, oh, not again.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, I think because she was in the right position, it didn't
Mm-hmm.
hurt as bad, where with Gavin, he was in the wrong position. So it just made it that much more uncomfortable. So they swiped it away. And then after a few pushes, she was born. And unbeknownst to me, she was stuck. So that's kind of what,
Mm.
I definitely wanted to explore, because I haven't really been able to talk about this openly, really. And it's kind of an interesting subject to think about, because we didn't know that she was stuck until the next day when the midwife debriefed us.
Okay. So what did they say?
So, well, I'll kind of end with how, she was born and she was put on my chest right away, and, everything seemed fine and normal.
Yeah.
We did a bit of the delayed cord, which I'll talk about why in a sec. And she was super quiet. Like, she was making some sounds, but she was like so laid back, so quiet, and just out of all the kids, the quietest, ironically now. And then that moment of checking to see if she's actually a girl, I remember saying, is she actually a girl? Because, like, I didn't believe it until she was born, and the midwife said I'm the only person they know that didn't believe the ultrasound result, like the ultrasound, and I'm like, no. So I'm just reading what Becky is saying about.
Yeah, I wonder what women did back in the day with minimal resources. Did they wait it out? Did they move their own cervix? The worst pain, so she remembers that too.
Yeah. So Emmeline was born. She lodged right away. Everything was good. And then actually, I was having trouble urinating after. So.
Oh, okay.
I don't
This
know.
is part of it.
Yeah. So I don't know how long it's supposed to be. Like, one of these questions I've thought about, because I think about my births all the time. And the midwife was like, really, it was within that hour of Emmeline being born, and she was like, I need you to urinate. Like, I really need you to urinate.
Yeah,
and if you
they want to check that box. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you can't, then I might have to think about putting a catheter in, and I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, petrified that I'm going to have a catheter in after having this home birth and have this clinical type thing happen to me. I did end up urinating, but I just wondered if it was because she wanted to get out of there. Why was I on this time crunch within this hour?
An hour
I just want
very soon after to expect that. And I don't know if other people remember in their birth experiences, because, they do that at the hospital too. They're like, think you can walk to the bathroom yet? And it's different than it being in your home. But yeah, that's a vivid, I think probably a vivid part of a lot of people's experience is that pressure to get up, detach from your baby, get out of, this feeling of rest, and have to go to the bathroom just so that they can take a box and say you peed.
Yes. And I remember trying to do all the things and going in. I had a shower, so my husband was doing skin to skin with her while I went and showered. And I just remember, because I'm back in the shower and I was just there, an hour ago, an hour and a half ago, and thinking, I feel so empty.
Yeah.
I just had this big belly, and now I'm like, I feel so empty being here. I did end up peeing. Everything was fine. And then, fast forward to the next day. So the next day, the midwife comes and she's debriefing us, and she said, so the cord was wrapped around her neck 3 times. And Logan said he remembered seeing them loop 2 off.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't think anything of it because our other babies had them. So she ended up saying that she didn't want to cause any alarm or stress because it was a non-emergent situation that unfolded afterwards. So she thought, the best time to tell me would be the next day.
Okay.
And she said that, so they got the 2 loops off as soon as they saw the 2 loops on. And then Emmeline wasn't coming with my next push. So she said, for a brief moment, she had to think, okay, is it the shoulder not coming out? So she tried to manipulate a bit to get her shoulders to be free, which she did. And then she thought, okay, what's happening? Well, why is baby not coming? And she ended up saying that she realized that there was a super tight loop that they hadn't noticed because her neck, was so chubby. Her chin was so chubby that they weren't able to see it properly. And she wasn't showing signs of there being a cord tight.
Okay.
So it's a complete shock to her and the other midwife to see that, as Emmeline was unfazed by it. So she said she ended up having to, this was all taking place under a minute, of the midwife's quick thinking. So she said she wasn't sure if she should try to cut it inside.
Oh, wow.
Or if she should tug on the placenta a bit. So she ended up tugging on the placenta to get it to detach enough that it gave the slack and Emmeline to come out so they could loop it off quickly and get her on. But
she didn't show, and she didn't need to resusc. They didn't need to do any extra oxygen. Yeah, that's so interesting because it's so how long were you pushing for with her?
20 minutes.
To me, again, not a midwife, not a doctor, but if they didn't see any signs in her after the fact, and you had only been pushing 20 minutes, is that really a situation where she's stuck?
Yeah.
And if you gave yourself more time,
yes,
would your placenta have started to detach? Would she have wiggled into a different position? Would your body have maybe made a little bit more space for her to navigate that? And it sounds like there are a lot of hands up in you doing things.
Tell me about it.
It's just so interesting because it's then not to take away from this experience and your story, because it's your experience and your story, but it's almost irrelevant. It's important to know, not irrelevant, but it's important to know what they were doing, because you're in a very different headspace. You're very focused. You're not thinking, hey, what are you doing in there? You don't necessarily have time to have those thoughts. So it is really good to know what people's hands were doing inside your body. But I guess to come back to the question is, was it necessary? And you have the evidence of she latched perfectly. She didn't look a weird color. They gave her a good APGAR score. It's very interesting that they explained it in that way and that they created this story and gave it to you. They said, here's your story, but that's their story.
Yeah.
But if you never heard that,
I never would have known.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was very interesting to hear it the next day. And I do remember feeling that's so scary. But then I just had to tell myself she was fine though. Nothing, there was no sign of anything. Everything was fine. Yeah. And then to go along with what Becky was saying on Friday, so on day 2, she was not urinating. So her bilirubin levels were really high and they ended up having me go to the hospital. So I was now navigating, oh my gosh, thinking here I am all over again because Avery, right, at day 3 had to be in the hospital. So I was kind of having PTSD coming back to me thinking, are we going to be here for days? Just like Avery, is something going to end up making it so they're going to have to give her an IV. Like, I was so worried. But she ended up urinating and everything was fine. But it was just one of those scary moments. Yeah, scary moments, because I thought, here I am again, back at the hospital after having a hospital-free birth, and
so disappointing.
you know, being in that environment. But I will say, because I was at the hospital during COVID, the nurse was fantastic. And I mean, I was there, I think 2 hours, if that. And the nurse was fantastic. There was no pushing anything on me whatsoever. Like, because, you know, I'm obviously worried with COVID and stuff that they're going to be, you know, just everything.
Judgmental with the home birth, even, like, for sure.
But yeah,
well,
no, they were
that is a story that I've heard frequently, is that I think it speaks volumes as well, is that the system is broken, but there are people within the system that navigated that time in a really good way. For people that didn't buy into the judgment, that didn't buy into the divisiveness, because those workers were also having their own questions, their own dilemmas, their own yeses and nos when it came to all of these all of these protocols and rules and things you were supposed to do with your body or not supposed to do with your body, whatever. So there's actually, and I say this all the time when it comes to like my radical moms and talking about like-minded folks, it's like there are way more of us out there than we were led to believe.
Yeah.
So it's really good to hear that you had a positive in and out experience, and some of your fears didn't come true, right? Because that person held space for you and made it happen for you in that positive way.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, because I mentioned earlier too that I had been doing these little pushes in that squatting position. So after I gave birth and the days that followed, my body, I felt like I was hit by a Mack truck. Like, I didn't have that same feeling after Gavin, that I was like, wow. Yes. Because, I mean, I just gave birth to my fourth baby. Like, obviously it's going to be a lot harder on my body than my second. But like, I could feel those muscles in my abdomen, like like nothing I had ever felt before. From doing, and I knew from doing all of those silly little pushes where I'm like, no, she'll just come out on her own with that fetal ejection reflex. Like, she'll just come. So then I was like, oh no, I'm really feeling that the next, I felt that probably for like 7 days.
Well, I think that's a really important part of your story too, is you were just like, it's not working, I'm gonna switch this up. Like, I was told that I would have this like natural thing that would happen because I got the home birth. Like, you like ticked your own boxes, right? Like, okay, I'm doing the home birth, I've got breastfeeding down, I want this natural birth experience to happen for me. I want to experience the fetal ejection reflex. But you just switched it up when it wasn't working and found something that worked for you. And I think that's something people need to hear, is like, we can't control birth.
No.
We have no control. We can try different techniques and strategies, but it's divinely given to us in the way it's supposed to unfold. And we just got to work with what we have,
Yes. And so too, I forgot to mention that the kids were obviously home because they were asleep, and then they did get woken up, I believe around like 5:15, I think, if I no, not 5:15, sorry. 4:15, because my mom got there around 4, and then Emmeline was born at 5:13. So I think they were only awake for about an hour, and my mom had them downstairs so they could hear me, because like I had mentioned before, I'm a very vocal birther. And they will still tell you that they can remember hearing me.
The cow noises.
Yeah, we remember those sounds you were making. Which always made me laugh. But it was a really nice moment too for when the midwives left and then the boys came in and got to meet her, and it was just like I will always remember that, you know, them being able to come into my bed and just gather around and get to meet their sister, which
Yeah,
we never.
hearing mom make those noises.
And I mean, I had prepped them too. Like I even showed them birth videos because I was like, these are the sounds you're going to be hearing. You know, I don't want you to be afraid. It's okay. Like, because
That's a really important part of the process.
back to Gavin's birth, when we were in the car on the way to the hospital, Carter, he was 3, he was almost 4, and I can remember him saying like, "Mommy, you're hurting my ears." Because of this sound.
I just want to.
But yeah, so I mean, yeah.
We just had some people chiming in. So Becky was saying that her sister had contracted strep A in a hospital setting, and so she said it's really important to know where the hands were, because that was an intervention that they don't know for sure if that led to the infection, but it's part of her sister's health picture and story as to maybe where that could have come from. And then Cheyenne also said that she resonated with that experience of expecting the fetal ejection reflex, but it wasn't like an efficient push, or it wasn't like, helping labor progress to do what she was doing. So I'm curious what you tried instead, Cheyenne. And then Claire said, babies have so much to say about how they want to join us. And yeah, it's a joint effort, right? It's totally a joint effort. And I remember, just also for context, I had a client in the birth clinic and in Peterborough who birthed her baby, and the baby had the cord wrapped around 5 times. Wow. And so they just went, whoop, 5 times. And it was just a really long cord, and baby was totally fine. And it was like, whoa, it's just a cool moment. They totally normalized it. And I think we need to hear about that stuff because it is normal.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, like 3 out of the 4 kids had the cord around their necks. Like it was just a normal thing for me. I don't really remember if Carter did. Like he very well could have, but that's not something I remember because he was a bit gray when he came out. So they had to like get him under the light really fast. So, and being on the epidural and stuff, I just don't remember it. Like I remember all the others. So,
yeah, it's very interesting how you describe that like heavy feeling too. It's something to think about.
Yeah.
I
remember going out to my chicken coop. I think it was like 7 days because I was in so much pain from like my muscles being sore, and like so me and Emmeline, we just stayed in bed for those like 7 days, and then like after 7 days I finally went outside and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this place? Like, because you're so used to being, I was the one going out every day feeding them, and I love my chickens. Like spending time with them is a normal thing. And then to like be away from them, like it just felt like I had been away for years.
Yeah, it's a long time on a homestead to be away from your chores and responsibilities.
Yeah.
But you did it. You did it.
Yes. I had the home birth I wanted, and it really, really was amazing. That spring, I ended up planting the placenta under a lilac bush in my garden. Just to honor it all. Yeah. And another thing too, like we live in an 1800s an 1800s farmhouse. And a huge part of me just thought, I'm sure there's been babies that were birthed in this house, like I'm doing what other women have done in this house. So it'll be sad.
That's a thread we're hearing in these stories, and I'm so excited to see if we hear it again and the days to come. Like, that's a question I'll throw out. Did you think about the women who've come before you, either in that physical space where you were giving birth or just in your lineage or globally?
Yes.
Did you pull that idea into your birthing experience that like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
This has happened before. And I think Cheyenne said that I asked her, if she switched up her pushing, and she said she didn't really. It was a long time of pushing, and he was quite swollen afterwards. But yeah, like she was talking about mental blocks, what are the mental blocks that can kind of get in the way of maybe experiencing that fetal ejection reflex. And sometimes that comes from within, sometimes it comes from external voices or I don't know, energies too, of just like this is how it's supposed to unfold. Like what if I'm curious with Emmeline too, like had it just taken more time, maybe you would have felt your body and her working together without having to push at all. Like we don't know, but it's something that is interesting to think about.
Yes, and to like typically all of the births, like I really am the type, I do have to push hard. Like I do have to work really, really, really hard at pushing. So yeah, I mean, maybe if I did just give it that more time, because I think I was like, well, this isn't working. So let's just get back on the bed. But another thing too afterwards was the midwife asked how come I didn't want to have a water birth in my tub. And I was like, I didn't really know that was an option, because at the time on their website, it said there'll be no water births during COVID.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
I immediately just like put that idea out of my head. But then she asked, oh, how come you didn't use the tub to give birth? Oh, what? Like,
again, why did you say that, lady?
Like, maybe if we had talked about this, instead of just all the dangers of what needs to be in place in case of an emergency, I'm like, oh, okay, that would have been nice to know. But I mean, Avery's birth, we already knew that me in the water wasn't working, so it probably wouldn't have worked in my tub. Maybe an actual birth pool for sure, because you can get in a way better position.
Yeah, it really depends. It really depends. And I think that's like kind of another theme and thread that's running through these stories. You just don't know how you're going to feel until you're in that moment. And things that are logical become illogical. And, it all just depends how you feel and what you just intuitively need to do in the moment. And I think we are really disconnected from our bodies. And Kayla said she felt really disconnected, from her epidural. And yeah, it's hard to trust we're up against so much to like trust our bodies and to lean into that in birth, because we've given away our power, which is what's going on in the chat right now. We've given away some of our power to these care providers. Like Becky said, gotta love the language. There'll be no water births. We forget who holds autonomy. And the fact that you were told like your kids weren't allowed to be there. It's like, wait a minute, this is my experience. And if I want to, give birth or have whoever come, like that's what I'm doing. So if you want to monitor me, like get on board. But we're up against a lot. And there's a lot of language in the mom community that perpetuates this by saying things like, oh yeah, they had to do this, or they won't let you go over your due date. And so I think we need to work on our language collectively to help the next generation of women who are having babies understand their power and their options, and that they do get to decide. And sometimes your baby decides for you too, right? Like,
yeah, actually, on that subject, only because I thought it was interesting. So during COVID, so all of the eye drops, that's the one I'm thinking of right now offhand. There was, I was going to decline it anyway, but there was a shortage. So they only had enough at the time for women who needed it, babies who needed it. And so that's when I discovered that the women, the babies who need it are from the moms who have a high risk of STDs.
Yes, yes.
So then I thought, are you kidding me? Like, why are you just putting them on the babies then that don't need it?
Yeah, it calls into
Like,
question.
you're
These.
okay. Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Like you're okay not because I mean I've heard women talk about things being forced on their babies in those situations, and even when you decline these things, you know, threatens to child services.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, how
It's
interesting.
very interesting. We had so in the local mom group, I don't know if you saw that, just because we live in the same area, there was someone talking about a vitamin K shot. And it's so like when you're like the natural one, it's so hard to and I don't know if any of you guys in the chat feel like this too, but like it's so hard to hold your tongue or like construct a reply to give people an alternative perspective, because the language from the mouths of women, right? The mouths of these moms was like, if you don't do it, your baby could die. So why wouldn't you just do it? And instead of asking questions and asking for the information, like the erythromycin, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Sometimes I get confused, but the gel, the ointment that goes oh my God, I should stop talking, but we've been chatting for a while. I don't want to get it wrong. And then people be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. The stuff that goes in their eyes, which is a gel or like drops or whatever. I can't remember now, but to prevent them from getting a sexually transmitted infection or disease that would come from mom's vagina onto baby through the birth canal. But if you have a partner or you have no partner, you know your sexual health, you know you don't have that, you don't need that because there's no risk, right? So like instead of unpacking and asking these questions of like, what is it for? What are the risks? What are the benefits of this? What happens if I don't do anything? And breaking it down and then deciding for yourself whether you want to take on that risk or not. It's presented as, well, your baby will just die if you don't do this thing. Meanwhile, that's so far from the truth. Yeah. And like the vitamin K one is even more interesting because it's about internal bleeding. That's the injection into their, usually the thigh. It's an it's in the muscle. And it's to help the blood clot because babies aren't born with a lot of vitamin K normally in their system. But let's just start there. Like, so all babies have low vitamin K. So again, what did we do before? Because how many incidents of internal bleeding was there? Like I just go into the numbers and I'm like, how many incidents of this have we actually seen? What are we seeing now? How many babies died? So there are numbers with those who did not get the shot. You know, there's like babies who passed away like right away, and then there's late term deaths. So there's these two sets of data. Then you start getting into all the data, but it's just fear mongering, which is what Kayla said in the comments. It's just fear mongering. And as soon as you unpack it, just a little bit of a question here and there, you'll be like, huh? Why are we doing this? Okay, I'm not interested. I'm going to take on that risk because I don't feel it's that risky that I want to inject or add this thing to my baby's life because of, you know, possible other risks that come with it. Yeah. So there's all kinds of like ways that we talk about pregnancy and birth that might make sense for some, but not for all. No. But we can contextualize it in this very hard-lined, like, you're the worst mom in the entire world if you say no because you're going to kill your baby. That's how it feels, right? That's how it feels.
Yeah, and it's
not
just
literally said that way.
The absolute worst. And it's heartbreaking. Yeah. Because, like, the mom ends up having this horrible anxiety of the perception of other people, for one, and then thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, then something's going to happen to my baby. And you're already on high alert, worrying about your baby the moment they're born,
Yeah.
right? Like,
and what does that pressure, one of the things that I think will come up too in these conversations is, which we'll wrap up in a second here. I know I'm getting tired and we've been talking for a long time, but is like, how does that confrontational conversation impact your experience and your health and your newborn's health? You know, if you feel like, oh my God, I have to be in confrontation with these people that I have feelings for because they just took care of me so well, probably in my birth, and we're all kind of on this high, and now I have to like advocate and go into a possible confrontation. You know, that is, what does that do to you as a woman trying to heal and bond with your baby and breastfeed? I'm just reading the comments. He said, the blanket interventions need to go. We treat everyone the same as if the small percentages apply to the masses, but they don't. We have to remember that the healthcare makes decisions that project them first and the patient second. 100%. Their decisions are based in liability. Their decisions are based on how much risk they want to take on as a business, from a business model with a profit over people perspective. And I will die on that hill, baby, because that is how they roll.
Yeah.
So then we have us. This is a life-changing experience. This is literally our children's lives, you know, that we're taking into our hands and into their care. And to them, it's $1, and to us, it's everything.
Yep, so, definitely true.
I
did go have a good experience with the midwives when I declined the gestational diabetes drink.
Oh, the gross orange.
Yeah, they gave me no. I was worried, and I thought, oh, I have to really stand my ground here. But they were like, yeah, no worries, that's fine.
I say that.
So I was like, oh.
Common one that they're used to people saying, ooh, no thank you, because it's also a fun one. They get to give people Smarties instead. So it's like, it's a fun alternative. No, that wasn't your experience?
Not with the New Life midwives. It's the Peterborough midwives are the only one who does the Smarties.
Oh.
So yes. So everywhere else they get that drink. But because I had 3 pregnancies without it, I'm like, it's unnecessary. I don't need to go. So
and so maybe we'll wrap up with this comment, because I think it's really good. Becky just says, I think once we know that the system is broken and kind of how their decision-making process happens, we can all begin to make more sound personal decisions instead of blindly following the medical model. And I think that's it. Like, you make the best decisions you can with the information that you gather for you and your family. And like, that's it. Yeah. That's all it is. Make your choice. And you might want that for your reasons. Totally valid. But we don't need to blanket everybody with all of these things that, you know, we know are just not necessary.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Chelsea, for doing this. It was fun to go down memory lane. Yeah. And you're such a good storyteller. This girl's like, I'm nervous to talk.
I know.
And we are at 1:48 p.m. So
nobody disturbed me, so that's good.
You've had some kid-free time. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so join us tomorrow for the next story. I think it's Sabrina's turn. She's going to be talking about having a preemie. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks everybody for the comments and for watching. And if you catch the replay, let us know what you thought about all of this beautiful discussion. And if you resonate with Chelsea's 4 births. Okay, have a beautiful day. Bye.